Can I ask the audience to come and sit in the front as much as possible, because this is such a big room, so it's going to feel a bit more intimate if we are sitting as near as we can. And I am assuming that people, thank you. I'm assuming that there will be people trickling in, because I think the tradition for starting on time has maybe not been upheld at all times. But we are actually going to kind of do it. We're already 2 minutes on time, over time, but my clock hasn't started. But I'm still going to just warm us up by saying that I lead the Digital Public Goods Alliance Secretariat here with my teammate John. And we are going to have a session about the role of digital public goods in enabling DPI, and including how that is enabling impacts in relevant sector use cases, because I think the use cases matter, what actually happens to real people's lives on the ground. And with that, I am actually not going to waste any time. And I'm warning my first speaker that you will need to work this microphone a bit to get to calibrate it, Viraj. We are going to start with 2 very brief lightning talks to kind of set the scene, to get us in impact on the ground mode, so to speak, but also to highlight the relevance of DPGs in this. And the short version is that, for the context of where we are now, digital public goods are open source solutions that can be used to build DPI capabilities. I'll say it as simply as that. There are some additional things like do no harm by design and so on, but the most important thing to remember for this context here is that they are open source and can be adopted and adapted. But today we're also going to hear about the construct of how they can be building blocks. And with that, I am going to invite Viraj Tyagi, the CEO of EGAV Foundation, to come up and explain a bit for us what it means for a digital public good to take a buildings block approach, and how that is enabling impact in multiple sectors, and in this case, in health. Viraj, please come up.
Thank you, Liz. It's great to be here. It's an amazing event, and seeing 500 people from 100 countries talking about DPGs and DPIs is really, really fascinating. So my name is Viraj Tyagi. I am from EGAV Foundation. We are a more than 20 years old organization, and essentially our purpose is how do you create building blocks and software which can help governments deliver public services, whether it's, getting your mosquito bed net, or getting your water connection, or, looking at things like sanitation, water, across multiple sectors. And really, before I say anything, I do want to say that everything we do is ultimately about people and citizen centricity. So essentially, there are 2 parts to public service delivery. There's citizens who need to have access to everything, and there's a government machinery at various levels, which is full of people who are trying to deliver services. You also need to build tools for them to deliver services better. So that's the 2 big part of kind of what we do. So I'll just briefly explain the DPG approach and how it leads to DPIs. I think there are 3 C's in my mind. There is common open source building blocks, which Liz referred to. So Digit, which is our platform, or which is our digital public good, has about 30 building blocks from common registries of things like projects, citizens, employees, buildings, and then common services which are frequently used for delivering services like workflow, payments, ticketing, all those things. So every DPI you build on top of it reuses those building blocks. And what we have seen in last kind of 7-8 years is more than 20 DPIs have been built in sectors. As yesterday I met somebody from Microsoft Consulting, and they'd built a agri DPI, which helps farmers discover prices and discover benefits from the government on the platform. So agri, education, transportation, urban, sanitation, water. So across sectors, different DPIs have been built by, an ecosystem. So that brings me to the, second C, which is community of practice or community and, ecosystem. So without having a community which can actually build on top of the digital public goods, you can't really have things done at scale. So communities by nature are local and they solve local problems, and they use this reusable building blocks to solve problems in their own context. And Dr. Condrino will talk about that, how it was done in Mozambique. And the third thing that I want to talk about is capacity. Ultimately, whatever is done needs to owned by the government or the local ecosystem so that they can sustain it. So we do a lot of work around capacity building, and all the DPGs kind of sometimes come together, like we work very closely with MOSIP on these things, about how we can, over a period of time, both capacity on the policy making side and capacity in terms of running those programs on their own. So capacity is a very important construct for the local ecosystem, and local capacity is important so that they sustain. So I think what we have seen is so far that the acceleration you get by using the DPG reusable building blocks. To give an example, and Dr. Contino will talk about Salama, which is a DPI built in Mozambique. But out of the 32 services which are used in building Salama, 27 were reused from the existing platform which was there, and 5 were built new. And amazing thing is, within 11 months of it going live in Mozambique, the same DPI with different names has gone to 5 more countries in Africa. So as you go to different stages, every next stage is faster, much more economical, and uses less capacity. So I think it's almost like the health campaign DPI has built like it's become like a regional DPI. And I think what we are seeing is, and Dr. Contino will talk about it, it's just not one disease area, it's covered multiple disease areas, multiple kind of campaigns. So the biggest thing, from a takeaway perspective is DPGs open a lot of possibilities for solving societal problems by using the combinatorial power of technology and the ecosystems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Viraj. I will now like to call on stage Dr. Baltasar Candrinho, who is the director of Mozambique National Malaria Control Program in Mozambique. Can I ask you, Dr. Candrinho, to come with us and share and continue really the story that Viraj started about how you are using a DPG as a building block and how it has helped you build Salama in Mozambique. Thank you. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Liv, and good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and sharing the experience in Mozambique with DPI. My name is Baltasar Candrinho, as Liv said. So in Mozambique, we are using Salama as a DPI ELF. Initially, we call it as a digit platform. Because of we are implementing in Mozambique, we changed the name for some local name. Is a Salama. Now we call Salama. Salama is meaning greeting someone in Mozambique. So Salama is open source, is a unified interface, and can interoperable with many systems. In Mozambique, we're starting with BedNet campaigns. After the good experience with BedNet campaigns, we move to another campaign. We call it seasonal malaria chemio prevention. And on this week, we are starting to training people for the last malaria campaign. It's an indoor residual spraying. If we complete this campaign, indoor residual spraying, that will start in November and will finish in January, February next year, so we'll complete all malaria campaigns with this platform, Salam. So the goal is moving beyond the malaria campaigns. It's starting to introduce for example, the tropical neglected disease, polio, and other diseases. Every time that we are using the Salama platform, people became more comfortable to use the platform. I would say why people is becoming more comfortable? Because with the Salama, people can have access, can act, can use, can react in the real-time data. People can see the data on real time and can make decisions and right decisions at all levels, supervision, at district level, provincial, even us at central level. We can make the right decisions. And also, every time when implementing the different campaigns, we see that the cost is coming down with implementing the platform. That's very, very, very important for us because you know that in this world, actually, the cost, there is a lot of challenge for the cost. If we can implement one campaign, that the cost is becoming more, we can reduce the cost, it's very helpful for all of us. So the good news is that actually the partners comes on board. Some partners, donors, are very happy to see the platforms works, and they are very willing to support Mozambique and continue to work with us. And the most important is that we can reach more people. We can, even those people that, the marginalized people and people who lives in very rural and peripheral areas that in the past with paper-based, it can be very difficult to reach. Now we can see because of we have data in real time and we have the geolocation data and we can see that no, the people in some areas, people were not, we have to go in this area or other areas. So that's amazing to reach these public health goals, to have people to have a health service. And lastly, I would say that Salama is a platform. It's working well so far, but we need a team. We need the people to work with the platform. Those people can be well trained. Those people can have the skills to manage the platform at all levels, at local level, even at the developers, but people in the field can feel like, okay, this is a platform that can solve our problems. And the government, for the government side, the government can be the ownership and say, okay, this is not something that came from India, that the e-gov wants to implement in Mozambique, but it's a part of the government. We want to implement it because we have seen some results. We've seen that people has access for the health. And lastly, if those people are well trained and we have this engagement for the government, it's a long journey to do that. It's not like today and tomorrow everything will be ready, but it's a long journey. I would say that step by step, we're starting and 1 year ago, and now we have 3 campaigns and complete. So, but it's not like fast, but step by step we reach our goal. That's have one campaign, one platform to fit all health campaigns. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful reminder of why we are here, Dr. Candrinho. I think this was a super inspiration for our panel. And in the perfect world now, as the panelists come on stage, this one is going to disappear. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to start by calling up, well, let's start with Ed Cable, the CEO of MIFOS. And then can I ask Kate Sumner to come up, who is a senior consultant around DPGs for gender justice at UN Women. Can I ask Paula Hunter, the executive director of Mojo Loop, to come? Greg Martel, the Director of Strategy and Communication at OpenSPP, Anina Versun, the co-founder and Chief Impact Officer of OpenCRVS, and Gabi Adotevi, the Head of Africa for MOSIP. Thank you. Okay, perfect. So these microphones are a little bit hard to talk into while looking at the audience, but we're going to do our best. But if we sit a bit funnily, it's because we really want to see you while we talk. Thank you. While we talk to you. We are going to do a very, very kind of discussion style thing here. And we have many great panelists. I'm not going to waste any time. And I think I will start by heading over to you, Ed, to get your reactions from MIFOS's perspective around what we just heard and the story of Mozambique, but the building blocks and how DPGs are being used to enable impact. So, Ed.
Okay. Thank you, Liv. Thanks for the opportunity to be on this panel with our fellow DPGs. So MIFOS, we maintain a suite of digital public goods around payments, not the payment switch itself, but rather critical orchestration tools to help a government or either a DFSP connect to a payment switch, and also a core banking system to enable the delivery of that payment into an actual functional wallet or account where you could add savings or lending on top of that. And one of the key principles of DPGs that I wanted to reflect upon that was illustrated from the lightning talks was around interoperability. So if you take a look at a use case like G2P or social protection, you really must have harmonization and interoperability amongst multiple DPGs. So first off, you need to verify that individual through an identity system like MOSIP, then enroll them in a beneficiary program through a system like OpenSPP or OpenG2P, and then you generate that payment instruction file, and you could use our payment hub to pre-process that before you send the payment to a system like Mojaloop, and then it could get delivered last mile into an account managed by a system powered by MIFOS. So there really does need to be that interplay amongst all those DPGs to build end-to-end DPI solutions. So.
Thank you so much, Ed. Paula, over to you from Mojaloop Zen. What are your thoughts about what you just heard, and also to build on what Ed said?
Yes, thank you. Mojaloop, we deliver an inclusive instant payment solution. And as I mentioned, we too are a DPG that's focused on leveraging open source components and building blocks, not trying to recreate the wheel, delivering more cost-effective solution to the marketplace. But through those open source building blocks and open APIs, we're able to knit together a solution that leverages the work that MIFOS is doing, MOSIP, and others, and so we can deliver a more complete solution to the marketplace without having redundant investments in development. And development, it's not just the coding, it's the testing, it's the maintenance. So having a solution that's interoperable with other DPGs allows us to deliver a more robust experience to the marketplace, but also lower cost to deploy, lower cost to maintain.
Thank you, Paula. Greg, over to you.
And thank you for having us here. So yeah, I'm with OpenSPP. We are an open source social protection platform. We've been working in the social protection field for nearly 10 years. Our previous experience is working with UN agencies, WFP, ILO, IOM. And now for the past 6-7 years, we work on open source solutions. First IDPass, and now OpenSPP. And I think the talk by Dr. Candrinho was extremely interesting, because what they are doing in Mozambique relates a lot. It's very similar to what we've been doing in Iraq for the past 3 years, where we deployed OpenSPP to reach 20 million beneficiaries. And now we are doing the same in Laos with a digital farmer registry.
Thank you, Greg. Anina, OpenCRVS.
Thank you very much, Liv. And first of all, congratulations to the work that Dr. Candrinho and his team are doing in Mozambique. OpenCRVS is a digital public good for civil registration. That's the registration of births, deaths, marriages, divorces, adoptions. And we've been grappling with our identity a little bit. But as a digital public good, we are a product. So we offer value in itself. We have UI interfaces. We provide workflows for civil registration. But we also have a civil registration database. And that's really where the DPI comes into the OpenCRVS product and our offering, and that is because we offer this legal and trusted source of vital event data. And just to illustrate this, we integrate with a number of other digital public goods, but also proprietary software solutions. One of the most impactful use cases is integration with identity systems. So we work closely, for instance, with MOSIP. So when a baby is born, we talk to MOSIP, a unique identification number is created, and then an individual has that individual number for the rest of their life. So it really is foundational identity with this relationship between civil registration and ID. But also that civil registration database provides other value use cases. So, we work closely also with OpenSPP in using that data to establish accurate beneficiary lists for social protection programs. So the use cases that we can build upon are plentiful, and we'll talk a little bit about it more in this session. Thanks, Liv.
Thank you, Anina. And then, to ask you then, Gabi, how does MOSIP kind of fit into this entire value chain? I think we're hearing here about an ecosystem and a value chain. So what is MOSIP's role? And also, maybe also to start you off on the next round of questions, what do you see are the core strengths of DPGs for successful DPI implementation? It's building on that.
So MOSIP is a digital identity platform, and we focus on issuing identity to residents of the country. So we focus on a foundational ID system. So what I will call the strength of MOSIP is the fact that most of all these use cases rely on a solid identity. So we can place ourselves as the base of everything, because once you have a unique ID, a very solid ID, it's very easy to integrate many use cases like OpenCRVS, OpenSPP, and then I will put MOSIP as really the base of what can be considered as when you want to build a solid DPI system in your country. Yes, start with identity. Start with what we call a foundational ID system. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Gabi. And can I ask you I mean, you've touched upon some of this, but just to make it clear here, because I mean, we're hearing so many terms, DPGs and DPI. What are the core strengths, to hear from the rest of the DPG product owners here, of how DPGs can enable successful DPI implementation? And you can build on what each other say. You don't have to say the same thing. But Anina, maybe start with you, and we can just kind of go product by product.
Yeah, thank you. So three very high-level things. One, obviously, countries can work with different vendors. DPI is a journey. There's so much work to do. So being able to choose, for countries to choose who they work with over time is incredibly important. That's what we're hearing from countries. Two, integrating through open standards, right? If for DPI to work, we need to work together. And finally, when it comes to digital public goods for DPI, it's the relationships we have collectively as a community have such a positive effect, because we think collectively, we think about solving problems together as DPGs, but also with countries to ensure that we're responding to their needs. Thanks.
Do you want to build anything on that, Greg?
Sure. Yeah, I think the sense of community is really key here. So we are not DPGs scattered around. So we're really an ecosystem. We work together. We work with Gabi. We work with Anina. We work with Ed. We had good conversations with Paula, and we're looking forward to working together. So this genuine collaborative spirit, I think, is really the essence of the DPG movement. And this is what allows us also to better understand first the use cases, and then how we can deploy our DPGs in the countries and to make it really a comprehensive solution based on building blocks.
Thank you, Greg. And you heard the word DPG movement. So what we're seeing here is that there is this really evolving community of those that are managing different open source technologies, DPGs, that can be used as building blocks. And they are kind of helping put these Lego pieces together, as Viraj was talking about. Paula, I want to kind of tweak the question a little bit for you so we also can build on it. And that is, I mean, we have many governments here at the Global DPI Summit. I think we heard something like 101 countries being present, which is immense, actually. If governments want to use the DPG for a DPI implementation, what should they know? What are some things they should think about in your mind? And again, some things may have been mentioned, but what would you like to highlight? And then to you, Ed, also, after.
Yeah. So one of the benefits of deploying a DPG in your infrastructure is that you have more sovereignty, more control over not just the data, but the digital infrastructure that's employed to deliver a solution out to your citizens. That said, once you take over control of your data and infrastructure, you have a higher responsibility to have the capacity to maintain and operate that digital public infrastructure. So I know many of my colleagues here are helping build that capacity in the various countries to ensure that if the country doesn't have the resources in-house, there's systems integrators and other service providers locally. They can help them maintain and operate that infrastructure without relinquishing control, because the country can then have a direct relationship with a local service provider rather than going offshore, flying people in with the core expertise, and have a much better control of the infrastructure and not have the vendor lock-in that so many of us are familiar with, not just here, not just in Africa, but around the globe. You know, those proprietary systems come with significant pain and cost associated with vendor lock-in that DPGs is breaking up.
See, Paula highlighted the word vendor lock-in. I think it's one that many of us have seen in different contexts, and also took note of the local service providers and the really opportunity to empower the local service ecosystem. Ed, what are your reflections on that topic? Are there other things you would like to add?
Yeah, I think just to add that adopting a solution built on DPGs is a really big shift from more of the traditional proprietary mindset. And I think in order to take advantage of all these benefits like sovereignty, local capacity and support, better control, you need to have that complete shift in mindset and recognize that a DPG can be a good steward to help a government go through that process. So the DPG can help to convene other DPGs in a common collaboration model. They can help to convene the local support providers. And then another key area is also encouraging the government to actually contribute back upstream to maintaining to the DPG, because that's one area where long-term the government will have better control and lower costs overall.
Thank you, Ed. And I think Dr. Kandrin, you highlighted some of this from the work in Mozambique on how the Mozambican government was now starting to use the same approach across different campaigns. They were able to reuse the same approach. But can you imagine if a contract had been entered to use a solution just to do the malaria program, they would not have been able to reuse that approach for polio, for instance. That's one example of the lack of flexibility that can come when you don't have that opportunity to reuse your own solution. So just to highlight that what this means is less polio vaccines. It means real things in real context. I actually think this is also a very relevant question for you, Gabi, around MOSIP and what your experiences have been.
Yes, so at MOSIP, we see all kinds of experience in various countries. I handle 15 countries with 15 different realities, and what I have noticed is what government needs to know is they need to focus on two things mainly. One is capacity building, and when I'm talking about capacity building, I'm talking about local capacity building. Among all the countries that I'm handling, I've noticed that countries with a focused team, countries who has a dedicated team for DPI, DPDs, are more successful than the others. So that capacity building can be a collaboration with the system integrator ecosystem. It can also go through academia. We have a very good collaboration with Carnegie Mellon University Africa, where we have champions who can handle MOSIP project fully on their own. So the capacity building can also go through academia. And the second thing is the government needs to understand that it's a whole ecosystem. Okay, it works as a whole. Identity is surely the base, but once you have identity, how do you put it to use? You need civil registry, you need social benefit, open SPP, you need payment system, modulo. So they really need to take time to design a good strategy to adopt DPGs or DPIs as a whole ecosystem. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Gabi. And I think there were some very kind of quote-worthy sentences in what you said there. So 15 countries, 15 different realities. But it's the same generic digital public good that is being, or modules of it, I'm assuming, that is being used in different contexts. So that is one example. But I also heard you said, when I'm talking about capacity building, I'm talking about local capacity building. So let's remember that. And that is in itself a goal, I would say. I'm actually pleasantly surprised by how we're doing on time. So I'm going to use the opportunity to ask each of them, again, each of the DPGs here, to share a little bit about what are your plans to make your DPGs even more impactful, and also where that involves other collaborations with others. Feel free to highlight that, but maybe start with you there, Ed.
Yeah, so I think in the keynote this morning, Pramod talked about DPI as a service, or DaaS, and so that's one area where we're trying to innovate as well. So we're launching a product soon called Mifos Gazelle, which will help to ease the deployment, not just of our digital public good, but any digital public good, so you can, in a containerized fashion, plug in a Mojaloop instance, plug in an OpenFN instance, but really make it easy for a government to both test out but deploy into production multiple DPGs to provide that DPI as a service. And our vision is to do this as shared infrastructure. For example, if a country's region or group of SOCOs all needed one common core banking system, they could use the Mifos digital public good to do that, and then they could all connect into a centralized Mojaloop payment system. So DPI as a service is where we see innovation and scale coming.
Thank you, Ed. Paula.
Yeah, one of the things we've been doing, particularly in the last year, is trying to get more dialogue with the central banks and the hub operators in countries about the use cases that are important to them. What might be working in country today, what's not working, and what they see as a future challenge. And one of the biggest challenges we see across the board is the issue of cross-border payments. You've got multi-currency, multi-regulatory authorities, and just all of the inherent complexity of managing transactions cross-border. So knitting together work with standards organizations like ISO and the Bank of International Settlement, it requires a lot of collaboration. It's pretty complex, and what we're trying to do is make sure that we have experts that can help navigate all these different standards and philosophies of how cross-border should work, and distill that into a useful implementation of the cross-border use case. Right now we're working with COMESA and rolling out cross-border solutions for them. And that's many countries involved in that dialogue, but really having the right expertise to help them navigate that very complex use case.
Thank you. So, and I would like to highlight cross-border payments again. If we think about what that can mean for real people, the opportunity, for instance, for migrant workers to send remittances back home. I mean, you have examples of that can be, and instead of having then to pay a really, really large portion of what you have earned, you can actually be able to send that money home, to take one example of many, of course.
Exactly, perfect one.
Yeah. Greg?
Sure. So yes, to achieve even more impact, I think two main things. The first one is to keep working on interoperability. So more integrations. It starts with proof of concept, then pilots, then scale. So more of them, and working more and more on standards with Digital Convergence Initiative and Anita Mittal and her team, keep working with G2P Connect. And so all of the initiatives are really key to make interoperability a reality. And then the second thing is to keep working in the field, in countries, with government bodies to understand better their needs and to adapt our products to their needs, to make sure we reach more people, and we also build, local capacity. A few of us already mentioned it, but I think it's key to keep working with them so we build the products and train their teams to use them in the right way.
Thank you. And I think there's just something I'm picking up here is that even though you're collaborating a lot, you're covering fields that engage with quite different government bodies. And sometimes not even government. In the cases of payments, it can be other types of very much. So I would like to emphasize this idea of whole of government approaches and the importance of having a whole of government vision for building DPI, because the engagement points for these different technologies will not necessarily be with the same ministry. So I think that is an area where there's something we can all do to help, also from a country perspective, to facilitate the uptake and use, is to make sure that that is also kind of a mandate from the top to take a whole of government approach. But Anina.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, all of what has been said is valuable. I think one of the things that OpenCRVS is looking for, both as an individual digital public good, but also as a contributor and as part of the community and the ecosystem that we have here, is research and development. A lot of the stuff that we do now is the bread and butter, you know, how can we support countries to provide effective civil registration services? But those things aren't necessarily going to turn the dial on, you know, completeness rates, making sure that no one is left behind. So how can we actually start to explore, you know, the plethora of use cases, the magic that's really going to change things in this world for the good? You know, the potential for value from civil registration data as DPI is incredible, and we've only just scratched the surface. So there's two things to introduce as a concept here. One is something that we were chatting to on the journey to the pyramids last night is, you know, how about establishing a research and development lab, but for the DPG, for DPI ecosystem, where all we do in that lab, there are resources specifically there to bring the magic alive, to develop prototypes, to test interoperability, and to show what the future of DPI actually is. Because we can do this individually, but it takes time, resources, and none of us have those things, you know, in reality when we're trying to support countries to be effective. The other thing I'm really excited to share, and Kate's going to talk a little bit about this now, is establishing kind of a research and development capacity within the OpenCRVS organization to look at how we can contribute to positive outcomes for women and girls. We're about to start looking at marriage registration, of which there is no data worldwide, and the rights associated with that are just huge. Kate's going to talk more to some of these use cases. So we're also looking for support to establish that project, but really let's unlock the value of DPI by thinking beyond just the day-to-day essentials, which is completely necessary, and start thinking to the future, because we'll be there before we know it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anina. And I love this idea that there was some, like, a real idea, actionable idea that happened during the bus trip to the pyramids yesterday, from what I'm hearing, and that is a research and development lab.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. So we have an actionable impact also from the bus trip. I think we should take note on that, that there's a lot that happens in the conversations in between the panels, in between, you know, the high-level talks. It's actually the innovation that happens by bringing us here together. So let's take note of that. And I'm actually going to, because we are doing okay on time, so I'm going to make sure that we can also hear from Gabi here about future plans for MOSIP.
Well, future plans for MOSIP, based on the experience on the ground, I've already said it. Now we are focusing more on capacity building. We want to make sure that countries are able to handle their own systems. So we have a different vision now. Now everybody knows ID. Now the focus is more on how to use the ID. Now that we know how to use the ID, how do you own, how do you completely own your solution? How do you own your ID? We focus on eKYC, authentication, and then when we start talking about use of ID, we're talking about integration with OpenCRVS and other DPGs out there. But there is also one thing that we have noticed is, and I want to add up to what Paula said recently, and I'm talking about a different angle now, which is the legal framework. Okay, so one of the main blockers we have faced in countries is when we start talking about cross-border use cases. We face the legal aspect. Okay, this country will say, yes, we want to do this, but the legal framework of the other country is not allowing us to do X, Y, Z. So most of the time, this is, now we need to rethink, focusing also on the legal aspect of things. I'm working in countries where they have the same program, but the way of implementing is completely different because of the legal aspect of those countries. Or sometimes you face delays because no, we cannot work on the cloud, we cannot do this, we cannot do that. So the legal framework is most of the time a blocker. We have so many use cases that we can do, but it's an issue because of the legal framework. So capacity building on one side, make sure we are really building local capacities, and then also start thinking when we interact with government, legal aspect. And you also mentioned something, most of the times we are facing issues because who is the main stakeholder? Is it this ministry, is it that ministry? Sometimes we will start the work and then we face a roadblock because no, it's not the right minister that you are talking to, so yes. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I actually, one thing again, because we're doing pretty okay on time, and I think I just want to make sure we can take home some of the lessons, because I heard also this, the idea of the research and development lab for the digital public goods that are enabling digital public infrastructure. To me, that sounds in a way like, how can we strengthen this ecosystem and collaboration and make sure that what is happening here is as relevant as possible for countries, but also that I know there are some funders in the room. I know Noorad is sitting there. I'm sure there is Gates Foundation somewhere in the room and others. JICA, I think, is here too. And I've been working in a development donor myself, and I know that being able to tell the stories of impact, the kind of story that we heard from Dr. Candrenio about what happens on health in the malaria campaign, we need to get those stories out. But they should be, you know, fact-based, well-researched stories, because we're here to drive impact. So they need to be fact-based, right? We need to be able to have that evidence. So I do think there are some kind of things that can strengthen the ecosystem, but also the impact through the ecosystem. And Gabi here, he mentioned the regulatory challenges. We have talked about the need to take a whole of government approach. Again, I will also mention, as someone who has worked in a donor capacity before, we need to make sure, and that's for the donors to find out, that there is also enough grant funding available to complement the various kind of commercial revenue generating models that can be built on top of this public good mandate, but without diverting that mandate, so to speak. So I think that is a call to action for some, but are there other things you would like to add really briefly? And I'll just open the floor for the product owners here. Have I forgotten something? Paula?
Yeah, I mean, all of us have tried to design our systems to be open and interoperable. But at the end of the day, we're trying to get deployments live. And we're trying to add features and test and maintain complex platforms. So when other parties come in and say, let's do an integration sandbox, I have to say, do I take my engineering resources off of deployments or new feature development or a more esoteric exercise? Not to diminish the importance of having that work. So the best thing I think we can ask for the ecosystem that helps fund this work is to help fund additional resources to do that work and not have us take our eye off the importance of getting those deployments live and getting the features tested and rolled out. I mean, and MIFOS and MOSIP have worked with us on G2P, for example, but we haven't actually implemented that instance of interoperability. So what happens is my engineers, and I won't speak for Ed or Gabi, but my engineers say, yeah, but I got to focus on Rwanda, and I got to focus on Togo, and I've got to focus on these other customers that are asking for new features and this cross-border work. I don't have time for this other project. So my request to the folks that have the big wallets is help fund expertise to do that work and pass it back to us. We'll help them, we'll support them, we'll engage, but we really need to stay focused on our core mission to deploy and increase financial inclusion for all.
And I think this is a super important point, because the whole idea of the open source mentality and of digital public goods is that, you know, there's an opportunity to reuse, to adapt, to build on. That includes, of course, for all of the private sector companies that are also, deploying and in many ways also making good money increasingly on the existence of these digital public goods as service providers in this landscape. But please contribute back. And also for the countries that are implementing. If you, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, Dr. Kandrine, we haven't discussed this, but when countries are implementing and doing local innovations on top by implementing a digital public good, where you see that local innovation can be relevant in another context, is there an opportunity for you to share that back? And we are seeing real examples of this happening. So this is not hypothetical, but I do think there is a need to make sure that there is also contributions back of various forms so that we can try to make this whole digital cooperation model sustainable, because it is a very different model to the traditional proprietary procurement by proprietary procurement. This can be a more collaborative model. And I think there are many stakeholders that need to do their part, and that's what we're really trying to piece together. So with that, and I don't know if I'm looking at a different clock than the rest of us, so it's magically still some time left, which is great, because there's one panelist we haven't heard from here yet, and that is Kate. But I was wondering, Anina, did you want to say a little bit more to kind of introduce the collaboration with Kate, and then Kate will introduce herself? Will that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
To segue us, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you. And I've partially introduced it already, but Kate is a dear friend and colleague. We've worked together for many years, and this is another example of really just the potential value of digital public goods. We are a digital public good for civil registration. We do what we do, right? We do birth registration, we do death registration, we do marriage. And then we have a conversation with someone like Kate and another colleague, Sophie, who we worked with years ago at Plan International. So, people with rights-based backgrounds who are looking at different use cases. In this instance, looking at gender justice, looking at positive outcomes for women and girls. All of a sudden, the value just multiplies. And, marriage registration in and of itself is important, right? It proves that you are that you have a legal relationship with your spouse. It offers all sorts of protections. But what are the other things that it can do? What are the realities in terms of service delivery? Because the majority of people in a lot of the countries we work in do not get married through civil legal processes. They're more traditional. How can we rethink this for the realities in which we work? And how can we partner with people like Kate, UN Women, and other organizations to really think how we can create value with digital public goods, the services they offer, and the data that is available. And on that note, I think Kate is far more qualified to expand on that, if that's okay, then.
Yeah. And Kate, it's a pleasure to have you here. I have been informed that clock is not correct. So no wonder I felt we had a good time, but we have 5 minutes, or maybe even 7. And it's such a pleasure to have you here. And I think the importance of women, girls and women, gender justice in this landscape, it's tremendous. And again, if you can also remind us, as I head over to you, and what are some of the real challenges for real people that are driving you and motivating you in this space? Because these are some really real issues that are really painfully felt by many.
Thank you very much, Liv and Nina, and everyone in this panel, and everyone in this room. It's a really great pleasure to be here today, and to think about half the world. And really what we're bringing to this conversation is the whole notion of inclusion in DPI. And I know everyone in your workspaces is actively thinking about this, but we still need to really consider how do DPGs work for girls and women, and particularly at the most vulnerable edges of those populations. And so while I am here today representing UN Women and thinking about DPGs for gender justice, in other aspects of my work, I work with grassroots women's organizations. And I've done that all my professional life, starting, ironically, in Cairo, moving to Palestine, and then through Asia and Pacific. And as everyone in this room will know, there are very specific services and rights that women need in order to be able to engage in the world. And so when we look at SDG 5, gender equality, it's in fact linking to everything we've been talking about: rights to education, rights to health, rights to live free from violence. How do we embed this in DPGs and DPIs? And I think all of us have at some level this idea of equality and justice. In fact, in our very first speaker today, Pramod Verma, looked at DPI as a service, and there was tele-law there. But I prefer to think of it in this really fundamental way of justice being rights. And at the very foundational level, there is no greater right than ID, and that basically powers a whole lot of access all the way through the domain for women and girls. I want to speak very briefly about where I was before I came to Cairo, which was in Kochi, and in fact with an organization supported by Rohini Nilekani, who we heard from yesterday, Agami. And that extraordinary organization works at the intersection of rights, justice, and technology. And in Kochi, they had brought together 40 tech enablers, many of whom are at this conference here: Microsoft Research, TechD, ThoughtWorks. The list went on, all donating their time over a 4 to 5 day period. And in the same room, we had more than a dozen civil society organizations, actually what we call frontline justice workers, saying, how do we make DPI work for me when I'm trying to assist a girl or a woman engage with a right, whether it's a health right, an education right, any other right. And we were literally co-designing and building DPI building blocks that would make the work of frontline justice agent workers more effective. And we were doing it in a space which is called the Tinker Hub. And just as we're speaking about research and development, that is effectively what Tinker Hub is. And they were talking about how they enabled the first women-only overnight hackathon to have taken place in India. And they were looking forward to the third iteration of this. And I mention this because it goes to the how do we do this? How do we deliver the messages of access, networks, registry, why this is important? And there it was, the future generation, 18 to 22-year-old women engineers, designers, etc., that would be working in this space. 4,000 of them across 50 different locations over 4 months. And the problem statement will be, how do you enable girls and women to access the justice that they need, the legal solutions that they need at every stage of their life, at school, at work, in the family, and to always know who to contact. And so instead of building in some remote way technology which we hope will do the job, Agami really showed how you can have tech enablers, civil society organizations, girls, youth, thinking about the messages, the advocacy, the campaigns to deliver this. I'm here with UN Women, but everyone in the room will know that if you design DPI for girls and women to deliver tangible rights and benefits, you will be delivering them to boys and men as well. So this is not an exclusive discussion that we're having. To conclude, I would like to focus on 3 wishes, because we're in the land of Arabia, we're in the land of thinking about dreams, and that was certainly what was happening in Kochi. I think it's important always to build these partnerships, but to think about tangible benefits. I think in very simple ways. How is what we're building going to work for a girl or a woman in a very remote location to access a tangible benefit and right? We need investment in areas that will benefit women and girls, and we need to problem solve together. I should mention a very exciting event that's actually happening here at the DPI Summit in this session, which is that UN Women will be joining the Digital Public Goods Alliance as of today, at this moment. Thank you. And as part of that process, we've been working with a whole range of partners, members of the Digital Public Goods Alliance, but also civil society organizations, to really think what are the 3 or 4 most critical things that we could be working on together. And Nina has already mentioned the first. How can we build the marriage registration component of Open CRVS? If we had to think of one thing that mattered most to girls, it is the age of first marriage and how we can push that back to enable education and opportunity. The second area is around how can we collaborate on a safeguards process around age verification for marriage officiators at village level when the vast majority of marriages of girls are never registered. Thirdly, how can we build networks and registries of paralegals and pathways for girls and women to access them? And that was what we were beginning to design in Kochi. And fourthly, how can we partner to really build the knowledge, the design, the building, and the communications campaign, so that we are doing all of that with girls and women so that they understand why DPI for gender justice is something that is important for them and will deliver tangible rights and benefits for them all their life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. And I will let those very powerful and calls to action end this panel. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.